Poetry? Poetry. No transition. No clever words to get us from point A to point B. Do you have any questions about this poem, going into this poem? Comments, thoughts, directions to take this, Nikki? Those thoughts are all welcome. And without further ado, this is I Begged You to Drink by Nickiej01. I draw the bucket from my well. My palms remember every hempen thread thinning, damp. They kneel before me, mouths agape, empty hands held out. I mistook their hands for worship and let their open mouths seem like prayer. Now, my bucket scrapes the bottom. Absence echoes against cold stone. The bucket returns sand, and empty lips wither backwards, seeking new altars. Who could worship at an empty well? I Begged You to Drink by Nicki. Very moody, right? Wells are always kind of spooky. We have this like religious heaviness. I feel like the idea of like religion can often be very sobering. Maybe that makes sense. Kneeling, empty hands. Like prayer is often associated with desperation. It can be, right? Not always. Worship, this devotion. I mean, it can be deeply positive, and it often is deeply positive for people. But like faith can also have this really sort of heavy weight to it, right? Oh, this is like too zoomed out. That's why we have edges. Weight, right? The WEIGH kind of weight is kind of what we feel, right? And like wells, we're pulling something up from the deep. It's kind of heavy, scraping the bottom. Like we have this big dark pit, echoes coldness. Like the vibe is very gloomy, especially when we're bringing in like emptiness, not having anything to drink. These words are all very, very sad. at least serious, if not sad. And that's definitely like the first maybe like emotional impression of the poem. And I'll read it again, right? I draw the bucket from my well. My palms remember every hempen thread thinning, damp. They kneel before me, mouths agape, empty hands held out. I mistook their hands for worship and let their open mouths seem like prayer. Now, my bucket scrapes the bottom. Absence echoes against cold stone. The bucket returns sand, and empty lips wither backward, seeking new altars. Who could worship at an empty well. I begged you to drink. So I underlined some things as we went along, just because we have like some characters, some different individuals in this scene that I think it's like important to understand, and it's presented very vaguely, but we have a an I and a you, right? And I think it's pretty vague, who you actually is upon a first read, at least to me. I is me, and I also has like my well, right? And we have this really like interesting thing, right? I draw the bucket from my well. So we could literally be having like a person, right? An actual physical person and their actual physical, right, like well, and these things could be sort of, it's them, it's their well, and that's what they're drawing from, a literal object, right? um we'd have to imagine in a poem, right, that this well, that my well, is probably referring to something different, not so much a literal, actual well that is owned by the person. I mean, maybe it is. But, you know, we make this well more than something plain, right? We have this well be like worshipped. This well is something of prayer and devotion, and I think we're describing something other than just an object, right? The way you read it is making me tear up a bit. I'm glad. There is a pronoun change. Which pronoun change? There are in fact pronouns in this poem, and they do change at times. But we shift, to they, right? I mean, this is a pronoun that I underlined. They, right? Who is they? And who is you? Are sort of, I think, things we're led to think. They kneel before me, mouths agape, empty hands held out. So we're talking about a plural they, not a sort of modern singular they. There's a number of people, right? People want water, it seems, right? Their mouths are agape. They, I think they want water, right? They have empty lips withering. They're thirsty. They are thirsty. But we didn't realize that. I didn't realize that, right? Um, I mistook their hands for worship. Whose hands if not eyes? Whose hands if not eyes? So are you saying that it's sort of like an interaction between two parts of the self? That we have their hands as eyes' hands, and that there's some kind of like dynamic internally within this speaker in the poem? I think that's plausible, certainly possible. That's something we see a lot in poetry, right? Is the internal dynamic. I'm not sure if I immediately jump in that direction, but it could be, right? Like a part of oneself that is sort of subjected to another part of oneself. It's possible. They kneel before me, mouths agape, empty hands held out. I mistook their hands for worship, and let their open mouths seem like prayer. So I think the scene we're setting, right, is hands cupped, like wanting water, mouths open, wanting to be, have their thirst slaked, right? And then this speaker is mistaking that sentiment, whoever they are, internal or external, as worship instead of need, right? And that could be within, that could be without, but worship versus need at the very basic level is what this seems to be saying. Because we're talking about hands, about I's hand in the first stanza. We are. Yeah. I draw the bucket from my well. My palms remember every hempen thread. Hempen thread thinning. It's kind of hard to say. Every hempen thread thinning. Damp. They kneel before me. Mouths agape, empty hands held out. I mistook their hands. Right? My palms, they, empty hands. A reasonable connection. Yeah. I tend to write with purposeful ambiguity. I think that's good. I have my meaning. I want you to have your meaning. Yes, everyone should have their own meaning. And I think that means sometimes I might disagree with an interpretation. Like, I'm not still totally sold on the they are me and these hands are the same hands. But that doesn't mean that can't be the case for another person. I am not arbiter of truth here. I'm just a thing on internet with camera talking about poetry, right? I'm not an authority in this field. And there are no authorities in this field. But yeah, these hands are important either way. Whatever they're talking about. I will tell you what my meaning was, but I don't want it to influence your reading. Yeah, and you can do that now. You can do that later, as you wish. I try not to let it influence mine, although it can be hard to not let it influence mine. It just involves a shift into being very focused on the text and what the text is implying. Yeah. I wrote about toxic empathy. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think it does go probably in that direction, right? I mean, we have this idea of giving from an empty well, right? People talking about the well, or one's own cup as one's amount of energy, as one's amount of stuff to give. But we'll come back to the text. Now, my bucket scrapes the bottom. Absence echoes against cold stone. The bucket returns sand. Sand dry, not water. And empty lips wither backwards, seeking new altars. So without water, right, there is no longer any worship. The worship ends when there's no water, when there's nothing being provided. Who could worship at an empty well? Right, a well, like, what is a well? Like, what does this thing do? A well is something that fundamentally provides. If a well is dry, it doesn't really do what a well is supposed to do anymore. And I think we would tend to abandon a well that has dried up, because a well is supposed to provide water. It's supposed to like basically give life, allow one to continue. So the fundamental shift is, there was water, now there isn't. Now these people don't worship anymore. Pretty straightforward in terms of like the story, the narrative in this poem. Interesting then, right, that our title is I Begged You to Drink. Because there is nothing to drink. And like how can we beg someone to drink from a well that is empty? Right? That's like the contradiction maybe happening in this poem. Yeah, I mean, Nicki, I guess I'll say that the direction I was already thinking with the analysis was definitely going in that toward that place of empathy, and that like giving more than one has, right? That idea of my well being something other than a literal well is one's well of energy, one's well of what they can give, their well of, time, resources, ability, love, even, right? This poem could definitely be interpreted as love rather than like something like as broad as empathy. It could be, I was giving from my well, although we do have multiple people, right, mouths, so it's maybe less justifiable that this is about a specific person just from the text. And yeah, I mean, like with that interpretation in mind, like it all makes quite an immediate amount of sense. I draw from my well, my palms remember every hempen thread thinning. Right. The thread is thinning, this thing is wearing down, unable to provide, it's breaking. Damp, I think maybe that just implies a coldness and a heaviness to it. They kneel before me, mouths agape, empty hands held out. So we've created this thing where people expect water. They expect to be, given, to be provided for. And this individual, right, saw this expectation that people wanted things from them. And they kind of reveled in that, right? Oh, I am being worshipped. These people are praying to me. I am providing for them. This is like a good thing. This like fuels this person's ego, right? That's the kind of toxicity of this empathy, if we're to use that sort of phrase. But then eventually, right, when we give, we run out of water. The well runs dry, and at very least, anybody who stuck around purely to be given water is no longer there for you, right? And a friend who just wants something from you isn't a friend. A lover who exists to just purely benefit from what you're giving is not a lover, even if it feels like, oh, they rely on me, they worship me, because when what you have is gone, they're gone too. Is the message to stop being a well? I think, like, the text doesn't necessarily like have like a strict provided moral, right? But this scene is very grim, I would say. I mean, if we were to like literally kind of like picture this, or like put a painting onto this. I mean, think about a person, right, with these like starving, gaping mouths of people around them, just like searching for something they can take, something they can be filled with from one person. Um, this person, interprets that as something that makes them feel valued, and it makes that person feel, you know, important, right? More important, superior, maybe, to be prayed to be a god, right? And then we have this sort of smallest stanza, absence echoes against cold stone, and this really feels like a moment of realization, like, oh shit, there's nothing there, there's nothing left, like this sort of thinning was ignored, right? The lowering of the well was ignored, and then it all hits in a moment when it's finally just gone. um and then like everyone leaves this person and everything they have that they thought they had, that they kind of uh you know maybe not genuinely created, the people around them like shatter. um and then there's like nothing left. I mean, we have this person describing themselves, the speaker, as an empty well at the end. And I think that means two things. Like, one, they, they have nothing left to give. They have no more capacity for love. They have no more capacity for care. And then, like, they themselves have become hollow, right? And I think this, the framing of that, it certainly doesn't support the idea of doing this, right? Because what happens is these people end up withering and, being dehydrated. This person ends up withering and being dehydrated, because of that kind of complex of worship. Um, and with this title, I begged you to drink. Like, this person desired for other people to drink. This person desired for other people to be reliant, right? With this title, to the point of like, oh, take from me, please, take. And it creates this like false sort of generosity, this self-destructive sort of thing. So yeah, certainly not a positive, putting a positive light on that, right? Um, and is the message to stop being a well? Well, I think maybe everyone is a well, according to this poem, right? Like, everyone has their well, and their well is just as a symbol, right? The capacity for love, or for care, or for giving to other people, for generosity, for empathy, whatever word you want to use. And if we overdraw our well, water runs out. If we don't draw enough, it'd be interesting to see a poem from the other perspective, right? The person who doesn't really draw from their well. The well doesn't really like fill up and spill over or anything, but like there's water that's just like unused. I think well water, like just based on like how wells work, and groundwater replenishes on its own, but it's like slow, to where if you overdraw the well runs out, and then like you've gotten rid of the groundwater. Um, so then, I think the poem probably would maybe vouch for balance, you know? Um, there's nothing to say that the speaker didn't go and after that, like, stop drawing from their well at all and start hating all of the people and not giving anything to anyone. But using the well probably means that no matter what, it would have taken time. It would have like been a long kind of healing process of entirely, right, burning oneself out, emptying the well entirely for that groundwater to come back, for them to be able to like provide again. And I think like that's how it works with people. So it's a good symbol, right? The well as our own capacity, because when treated well, right, as Nickiej says, to be a better tender of my well, um, treated well, when used in moderation, the well can have enough for me to drink and enough for a few other people to drink, and can last indefinitely. Um, but then too much destroys it. Yeah, I think there's an interesting side of this to explore with like the well that isn't drawn from at all, like what that would mean. But that's another poem at that point for someone else to write. Um, the sound is something I appreciate in this poem, Nickiej. Um, I draw the bucket from my well. My palms remember every hempen thread thinning, damp. Remember every hempen thread, and it has this, like, this first line has a rhythm, or this in this first stanza there's a rhythm to that. My palms remember, ember, we have like the e, and it's like it just sort of like keeps going, and it's not necessarily fast because we have like these long like m's and r's in between. Like it doesn't necessarily like roll off the tongue. Like remember every hempen thread is kind of like hard to say, but like my palms remember every hempen thread, and it feels like it's like this just nice even pace. It sort of gives the feeling of like, hand over hand, like pulling the rope, the bucket up from the well. Remember every hempen thread. It's like unrolling, it's pulling in, right? That kind of feeling. Thread thinning, right? It almost like wants to continue with this alliteration and then it stops. Thinning. Damp. Right? And damp is just like such a damp word to land on. We just like kind of squish down onto this final word in the stanza and it's like it's over. Right? I draw the bucket from my well, my palms remember every hempen thread, thinning, damp. It really just stops. And I think this M dash helps us kind of trail off. If someone writes that, I hope they share it with me. Hopefully they will. I don't know if I will, but I might. They kneel before me, mouths agape, empty, hands held out. There's like a, empty, every. These things kind of still connect sonically. Like I feel like also in the other poem you wrote, you had this way of sort of carrying on similar sounds throughout the whole poem, even like prayer with like they and empty, these like a e kind of sounds. Um, Scrapes, prayer, scrape, similar sound kind of setup with those. But we bring in like a new sound once we get to the mouths, and it's the mouth sound. It's the ow, right? It like opens up, mouths agape, hands held out, and like each of these things, and we have like worship, open mouths, seem like prayer. It's like all of these things have that really round, open, um, you know, hollowness, right? And I think it gives uh, each of these kind of descriptions like a heaviness that they are empty, open, right? It's like a mouth that wants to be, given water. Now, even now, right? And this carries that feeling of emptiness from the mouths. And that's when we hit my bucket scrapes the bottom, right? We have some hard sounds. Bottom, scrapes, bucket. After this, like now. So it's almost like the harsh imposition of emptiness, of openness, right? It's communicating that very well through the sounds. Absence echoes against cold stone. Absence echoes against cold stone. Stone. It's like the hardest kind of sound in that. Stone. Tuh. Right? Absence is pretty soft. Echoes, I feel like we don't super stress that k, not echoes, it's like echoes. Against, a softer T. But then like cold stone. So again, we're doing this thing of like open sounds, soft sounds, that feeling of emptiness, and then like the sudden harshness. And I think this is why this feels like a moment of recognition, like a surprise, because the sound is really communicating like a change in tone and like these sort of conflicting and like unexpected events. The bucket returns sand. Empty lips wither backwards, seeking new altars. And I think these connect too, right? The P to the P, the I. And they kind of like nest, right? Empty, we have sand and, right? But then like empty lips, and then we have like lips wither in the like I. That color doesn't really show up. I. And then we have like wa, and then we have ka, seeking new. I mean, sort of, right? The E and the U, the new, are close, but it more brings back the wa sound, I guess. And then alters, kind of just maybe with backwards a little bit. But these words kind of like nest each one into the next one throughout this line. And I think it gives this feeling along with like the actual meaning of the text, right? They're receding, they're withering away backwards, they're dying. So it has this like fading to it, right? The bucket returns sand, and empty lips wither backwards, seeking new altars. And then it's done, right? They're gone. M dash as if we're trailing off. Like there could be more, but we don't hear it because they've withered, right? The same here, right? M dash as if we're still pulling. Remember every hempen thread. We move on to other things, but it's almost like it continues. Who could worship at an empty well? And the question kind of just like hangs out there at the end, you know. Um, there's some like assonance inside of that as well, right? I went for a beer. What did I miss? You missed us talking about wells, I guess. um, but yeah, I think the sound really contributes to a lot of things going on there, and like I don't know, the it makes me want to read it again, right? With those things in mind. The bucket returns sand, and you know like it starts strong because we have like sand and we want these to like drive into each other. The bucket returns sand and empty lips wither backwards seeking new altars. Right? That's cool. I like that. It invites the reader to do that, to read it as such. And I think that's cool. I draw the bucket from my well. My palms remember every hempen thread, thinning, damp. They kneel before me, mouths agape, empty hands held out. I mistook their hands for worship and let their open mouths seem like prayer. Now, my bucket scrapes the bottom. Absence echoes against cold stone. The bucket returns sand, and empty lips wither backward, seeking new altars. Who could worship at an empty well? Right? Like the sound. It sounds good. It does just sound good. I like the sounds going on in this poem. Yeah, I think I can tell that your brain really loves assonance, Nikki. It's very, very present in your work. Yeah, it's a vibe. It's a whole vibe. Yeah, I really have trouble with the perspective shift in the poem. I mean, like I see what you mean, right? We establish my palms. I draw the bucket from my well, my palms. This is sort of like a plural character that we introduce, right? That we could call the palms someone or something, an object. Remember every hempen thread thinning damp. Right, and then we say like they kneel before me, and the last plural thing we've referred to is my palms. Right? I do think personally, right, we have like a few things. First of all, the sound of this stanza makes this damp like a really satisfying like landing point. Thinning, damp. First stanza break. I think stanza breaks always invite us to think about like, are we changing direction? Are we changing topic? I think that's usually what we should default to in a poem when reading a stanza break. And sometimes poets do it a little like subtly, where you'll have a sentence go through a stanza break. But I think even when you see that, oftentimes the break is the point in which like the tone or topic or idea of the sentence is shifting from one thing to the next. And I mean, sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes stanzas are visual, but then we say they kneel before me. And I think, I mean, I guess a signal is like hands can't kneel, right? Hands don't have knees. Hands then don't have mouths. Hands certainly don't have hands. I mean, maybe our fingers are like the hands at the end of our hands. That's a way to describe them. Um, and I guess for me, like that's enough as I'm reading to be like, okay, we're definitely not talking about, right, the palms anymore, because palms, like it's a real stretch. I mean, it probably can be done to give palms mouths and to give palms hands and to give palms knees and bodies which they can move. Um, but I think that's enough for me to be okay with the perspective shift. Um, and then it forces us to kind of come back to the they and be like, wait, who? Right? We ask that question, who is they? Um, and it gives a little bit of moment of pause maybe for the reader to consider like what is actually being described here. And right, that's like the riddle, right? You say, Jessica, you write with some intentional vagueness. And I think if anything, like the question, the riddle to be figured out in this poem is who is they? What is the relationship of I and you, I and they, internal and external? Um, and I think like I don't know. I guess I find that it accomplishes it fine. Um, I'm unsure what else I would tell you in that regard. Yeah, I don't know, because the text does work for me. But yeah, I don't know. Stanza break helps. Just the pure description helps. The sound is contributing to them being different by ending firmly, period, right? Um, and like poetry is allowed to break the rule, right? Of there doesn't need to be, they don't need to be mentioned before we call them they. We can have these floating pronouns of like, you could start a poem with like, he said he loved me, right? And that's that seems entirely normal, right? Like that sounds like the opening to any old slam poem for sure. Um, and and right, it invites the reader to infer like, oh, who is he? Who's the relationship between poet and he, or speaker and he? Um, so maybe that's just an opportunity to like let your mind become more flexible and allow pronouns to not have reference, right? You can write a perfect form poem, all following the rules, the grammar rules, and still be a bad poem. Good form doesn't equal good poem. And let's say we did describe they, right? Like that's an interesting question that is sometimes like useful to ask. Is like, well, why didn't the poet describe them, right? Like we can look at what the poet chose to put in the poem. We can also look at what we feel like the poet left out. And in this case we can say, well, they left out, who they is, right? They left out this detail. Why? Does this help the poem? Does this hurt the poem? And we can like dig into that idea. And one way to think about whether this helps the poem or not is to imagine this poem as if they did do the thing that you maybe wanted them to do. So that would mean putting something in here, putting a line in, putting a full stanza in that introduces this group of people before we describe them and their open mouths and their empty hands. And like, how would we do that, right? We're trying to describe like the group of people who rely on the speaker for things, who you know have become, who are like the sort of leeches to the speaker's emotional, I guess, perceived generosity. They're like excessive empathy. And like we could go very broad. It's very broad. Like you could say, I don't know, like the people around me, but like that's just not very poetic, right? Like my what? My devotees, they kneel before me, mouths agape, empty hands held out. That would establish them and establish the religious context. It sort of continues what we're doing. Devotees even maybe goes with kneel, right? And before me. So, let's say we put that line in. Damp. My devotees, they kneel before me. Well, then you can just say, my devotees kneel before me, mouths agape, empty hands held out, probably. Like maybe that's the direction you would go. And like it increases the clarity for sure, right? But I don't think it, maybe there's a better word. I don't know if there's something you would use, Ishmael. Because I think if you had a suggestion of how you'd rather see the poem work to add clarity, that would be interesting. Um, but like we add that, and we still don't know like who these people are. So we can go more specific, and we can say like loved ones or lovers could be kind of interesting. Um, like to tie in like as a sort of contrast to the religious aspects, but then it brings in like specific love, and then you have this weird like polyamory question. um like I don't know how you would do it within this poem. um I don't know if you have any ideas, Nikki, as a thought experiment of like what one would do to make that more clear. um and I don't personally find it like necessary, but it does seem like it would be hard. And I think they also does something very nice, is it unsettles the reader, right? Like when ambiguity is the goal, when ambiguity is Nicki's intention, then, you know, Ishmael, you not liking the ambiguity is successful on Nicki's part. And and that frustration is valuable, right? Let's start from the pronouns roles in the analogy. It's not even certain if I is the well or a person. Right. And I think that's effective because my well, right? Like I think that contributes, that that lack of clarity contributes to Nicki's goal, right? Because I like my well is me. My like energy for capacity is very much like the way that my capacity for empathy is very much like how I interact with the external world. Me being my well, like we sort of are our well, at least to other people. We also aren't our well because we have an internal world. Um, And like when we start from there, now we have like a consistency created. Like it becomes consistent that like there's a vagueness. I mean, I even asked this at the start, like, what's the well? What's the relationship to the well? And then I said, who's they? Right? Um, these things are tonally consistent in their ambiguity. Um, and I would be even more hesitant to want to change this, right? Unless, of course, Ishmael, you could justify the well being less vague, and if you had a reason that you think that would be more effective, then that'd be cool. The well is an extended metaphor with many possible allegories that can be attached to it. Yeah, I mean, I think the well's a symbol, right? More than a metaphor. Metaphor is like something is like something. No, metaphor is something is something. Like something is analogy, and then symbol is just like I have a well. Right, we're creating like a specific narrative where we can think of a literal person with a well and people surrounding them, um, uh, and then that becomes a symbol for like an actual interaction. And is that a metaphor? I don't know. The lines blur here. Actual Barth's take. I haven't read any Barths. Um, uh, was Barth's about extended metaphors with many possible allegories that can be attached? If so, then I guess it would be. um, yeah. I like the vagueness, personally. And like you said, Nikki, you have this like religious connotation, and I think like vagueness uh, kind of adds like a mysticism sometimes to poems if you don't go too hard with it, right? Where like something being unclear has this feeling of like, I don't know, like spiritual, kind of it's slightly fluid. Um, so I do like that too. I also meant for the title to have a religious feel to it. I begged you to drink. Mm. I'm just now seeing like I as in they and you as in I, right? I, the thirsty, begged you, the I, to drink from the well, right? Because these are the people begging, which makes it great, right? Because it has a double interpretation of I want you to drink from my well so I can feel like powerful, and then like you are begging to drink from my well because I've made you reliant on my generosity, which is super toxic, right? Um, like now that I notice it in that way, that's like an incredibly toxic situation where it's like I like that you're reliant, and um, and you literally have to like beg me for my generosity. That's that's good. I don't know if that was the intent, but that's a banger title actually. Upon further inspection, now that you called attention to it, um, and yeah, I mean like water, right, is very like religious in many ways. Just it fulfills a fundamental desire. So yeah, uh, I like it. Um, I think it's a great like cautionary tale um, about this, and would maybe encourage someone to manage their well. Sound is good. I don't know. It's a vibe. It's a vibe, I think. um, you have any questions, Nikki? Does anyone else have questions or more comments or things to posit about this poem? Uh, Critiques? Do we hate it? Do we hate parts of it? Are there things we think could be better? Weaker, better parts, favorite parts? I don't know if Ray, Ishmael, you have favorite parts of this poem. What's your favorite part of the poem, Nikki? Do you have a favorite line or stanza? I've never asked someone that about their poem, I don't think. Like, what's your favorite part? Uh, I hate the way I felt when I wrote it. Ain't that right? Um, you like the last line, who could worship at an empty well? Yeah. I get definitely, like... It's very much like a final lament. Like... It also has, like, kind of two meanings. Like, who could do that? Who would do that? Worship at an empty well, ask to drink when I'm out of water, right? And then, like, who could worship at an empty well? Like, they can't, you know? Who could, as in, like, the rhetorical question, which kind of brings back the sentiment of the, title, where it goes both ways, kind of in both directions. Has good sound, who could worship at an empty well? Yeah. It definitely feels like, right? I mean, you said you hate how you feel when you wrote it, so you were probably kind of in this moment um, of this actual feeling. And this does really feel like a distillation of, like, that feeling of just having nothing left. It reminds me of a poem of mine, which I've read on stream before, but maybe I'll read again after this just to share, called Good Wine. Very similar. It's just about filling people's cups. Yeah. I likes it. I kind of saw a maternal old wisdom drying type read to it. Yeah, it does have, I mean, like I said, cautionary tale, right? It has a wisdom of, like, I've done this thing. I've messed up in this way. Now don't do the same thing. Don't be an empty well. Don't try to please every mouth. Don't try to fill every person's cup. There's a very relevant, like, reading as an artist rather than empathy, but as just pleasing people, where if you do everything, if you make your art to please others, if you, sort of exist to give and just, like, slake the thirst of every single person you ever meet, then you'll never actually get to drink yourself, or you'll run out of the water to sustain yourself. That's like a whole nother interpretive direction, right? It could even go like love, sexual, referring to, like, partners over time, like using one's body. And then there's just nothing left, no more desire, no more. When you hit sand, you're depleting your foundation. Yeah. That would be a fascinating line for this poem. Now that you bring up that meaning, Nikki, if you had pulling up sand, and then rather than withering, them taking the damp sand too, and shoving it in their mouths, and, like, even that they will take, right? And then who could worship at an empty well? Who would ask me to draw up the sand from my foundation to give to them and gorge themselves on, like, the base fundamental level of my being. Oh, that would be oh that would be visceral, right? Because it does add that, yeah, grotesque sort of horror element of like eating damp sand, right? That would be oh shivers. Ah, yeah. I really dig that. Um, yeah, you could even bring in, damp again, referring to the sand. Be kind of cool. I don't know. Trying to get any water out from it. Ugh. Yeah. That's cool. Certainly an option. If you add that, if you edit it and add that, send it. That'd be super cool. No pressure though. um. Oh, my favorite part. I think it's the mouths for me. It's thinking about like these hollow, like things that just like eat and thirst and want, right? I think there's like a strong justification for one to interpret this poem through like the double meaning of thirst, um, where we like take it in like a sexual direction, where like everyone looks at the body as something to be consumed, and like over time it's worn down to just like nothing. Or eating from your hand and continuing once the food is already finished. Oh, that's grotesque too. Yeah. Um, Ishmael. Then you're bringing in like the saying of bite the hand that feeds, and that could take the poem in a whole nother uh, direction, right? To start gnawing on the fingers, um, and then it's like literally the consumption of the body, the self. It could also be applied to celebrity. Yeah, anything where like attention is on one person. I had that thought somewhere a while ago. um, yeah, ugh, gnawing their fingers off. This messed up. Yeah, this poem definitely can go in a lot of ways, right? Um, I think that's all. I'm gonna read it again, and there's a little break coming up, so I'll read it, and then there'll be a break, and then we'll come back, and I'll share my poem that is kind of similar, and then we'll maybe go on to something else. Yeah, that seems reasonable, right? I like this one. And we drew a picture. I don't always draw pictures on poems. This is why I write it ambiguous so it can go all the ways. Yeah, for sure. It's a good thing to do. It's the interpretations graph that I showed the other day. I don't know if you were there on that stream, Nikki, when I was drawing that graph. I can do that after the break too. I begged you to drink. I draw the bucket from my well. My palms remember every hempen thread thinning, damp. They kneel before me, mouths agape, empty hands held out. I mistook their hands for worship and let their open mouths seem like prayer. Now, my bucket scrapes the bottom. Absence echoes against cold stone. The bucket returns sand, and empty lips wither backwards, seeking new altars. Who could worship at an empty well? I begged you to drink. Bye. Nickiej01. Thank you so much for sending this. It was a good read and some good conversations in there, and maybe supplied some good ideas for you or other people to write. You know, the well that is never drawn from, the eating of the sand at the bottom, whatever you're saying right now, Ishmael, with eating each other's lips. Scary. Um, and yeah. But for now, we're going to take a brief little break. We'll come back. I will read my poem. And yeah, we can yap for a little bit and maybe read something else. Stand up, drink some water, go to the bathroom. Just move, get away from the screen. Please actually move. It's good for your body. It's good for your mind. Yeah. And we will return shortly.